Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. My name is Samuel. You'll probably be seeing me coming up on your screen as Marvin Reed. I am not him. He is, however, with us. And we want to thank you so much for taking the afternoon out to join us and be a part of this presentation. You will be seeing in your chat a link to a pre-test, right? This pre-test is mandatory for your CMEs. So please go ahead and click on that link and do the pre-test. It's mandatory for your CMEs. All right. Thank you very much. All right. Good afternoon again, everyone. Thanks for joining. We start officially at 1:30 p.m. I should say, officially in that. Currently, we are allowing 15 minutes for persons to do their mandatory pre-test. You won't have another chance to do this. I'm not going to be sending it out again. Please go ahead, look in the chat bar. You'll see a link, tinyurl.com/MOHW pretest one, because this is seminar one. We have 2 seminars this week, 1 next week. Please go ahead and do your mandatory pretest, and then we'll begin at 1:30. Again, please conduct this mandatory pre-test. Without doing the pre-test and post-test, persons will not be able to apply for their CMEs. Please conduct it now. Thank you. It's on your screen. Hi, afternoon again, everyone. My name is Samuel. Thanks so much for joining. I see persons having a lot of questions. Um, so please type your questions in the Q&A. If you want to, you can also use the chat. If you're raising your hand to say hi, hello, the file, as I'm saying, here it is in the chat. I'll share my screen so you see what I am seeing. Here it is. Once you click on the link, it comes up perfectly fine. Let me go again. All right, so we go from the Zoom chat and you click on the link and it launches this page here, which is the pre-test. And you can go ahead and fill out answering these questions. You click on submit and you've completed your pre-test. That's it. Thank you for that question. Fantastic question. Once you've done the pre-test, you've done the pre-test. Then we'll get into the presentations. We have three wonderful presentations today by three doctors who are very passionate and have put a lot of work into what you're going to be hearing and seeing and participating in today. So once you've done the pre-test, you've done the pre-test. We think that it should take about 2 minutes to do the pre-test. We've allotted about 15 minutes for all the participants who are in so far. We have about 1 minute before we get to 1:30, and at 1:30, we will officially start our presentations, all right? And we'll be handing over at that point to our moderator for the day, who will lead us, give us an introduction, and then, of course, we take it from there. So it's now 1:30. Check the chat again, ladies and gentlemen. I'll continue to blast or post the pre-test link there. And once you've completed the pre-test once, you don't have to do it again. And that is it. All right, have a wonderful day, and we're looking forward to the presentations. I'll hand over to our moderator for the day now.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I am Dr. Julia Rowe-Porter from the Ministry of Health and Wellness. It's my pleasure to be moderating the first of two sessions for the interim guidelines in the clinical management of hypertension and diabetes. This is the first one for hypertension. Second one will be next week. I am going to ask that okay, all of you would have finished their pretest. I'm going to now ask for Dr. Nicholas Skiles, or Director for the Non-Communicable Diseases and Injuries Prevention Unit at the Ministry, to bring opening remarks on behalf of the Ministry. Dr. Skiles.
Good afternoon, everyone. Where am I? Welcome to the first in our series, well, in our two-part series in the management of diabetes and hypertension. Thank you so much for coming out on a Sunday. So on behalf of the Ministry of Health and Wellness, I welcome you to these sessions. Welcome to the members of the Ministry of Health and Wellness who are online. Certainly acknowledgement of Dr. Donald Gordon, President of the Association of General Practitioners of Jamaica, Dr. Williams Green and Professor Reed from the Caribbean College of Family Physicians. We welcome our public sector service providers, our medical officers of health, senior medical officers including our DMOs or family nurse practitioners, and other healthcare providers. And we welcome our private sector providers who are so key in the work that we currently do. As you would be aware, diabetes and hypertension form the majority of what we see on a daily basis, and certainly contributes greatest to our health outcomes. And therefore, if we are able to impact these two conditions positively, we will see the greatest impact in terms of improvement on our healthcare outcomes. So the ministry has invested over the last couple of months to have these guidelines prepared, interim guidelines though they be, so that we will be able to have these sessions. Persons are aware of how patients are managed, any new developments, and then we will have a more comprehensive process following on to this. So we do know the issues that we're facing now in terms of COVID, and certainly as frontline responders in all of our spaces, we do understand that it is a stressful time, and we hope that, you know, through your own coping mechanisms, you are able to manage yourselves, even in terms of your own risk, and also at the same time be able to provide the best possible care to your patients. And therefore, I just want to leave you with a scripture, Isaiah 41:10, which says, "Fear not, for I am with you. Be not dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you. I will help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand." And as we continue this battle on this forefront, so the COVID pandemic is there, but we also have our chronic epidemic of diabetes, hypertension, and other non-communicable diseases. And this is certainly the first in a series for us to continue to tackle this scourge. So I want to thank you for coming out on a Sunday, and we hope to have a wonderful afternoon this week and next week as well. Our moderator will share how the information can be accessed by others, even for those who are not able to attend today. So thank you so very much, and keep heart, and I will see you again next Sunday. But I hand over back to Dr. Julia Roporter at this time. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, Dr. Scares, for those greetings and welcome. So the ministry is particularly delighted to be partnering with the Caribbean College of Family Physicians and the Association of General Practitioners of Jamaica. We've also partnered with the Association of Consultant Physicians of Jamaica in the development of the interim guidelines for hypertension and diabetes that we are doing this training session today and next week. So the guidelines are freely available. They're on the ministry's website. If you go to the ministry's website on the home page, if you scroll to the bottom, you'll see resources. When you click the drop down arrow, you'll see interim guidelines. Both of them are there to be freely accessed by everyone. And I'd like to, at this time, welcome Dr. Donald Gordon, the president of the Association of General Practitioners of Jamaica, that will be bringing greetings at this time.
Thank you, Dr. Roporter. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, representative from the Ministry of Health and Wellness, Dr. Skiles, Dr. Roporter, and other senior medical officers. Good afternoon to our presenters, Dr. Pauline Williams-Green, Dr. Aldit Buckland, Professor Marvin Reed. Good afternoon to the audience, and good afternoon to the technical team who will make this evening flow very flawlessly. On behalf of the Caribbean College of Family Physicians and the Association of General Practitioners of Jamaica, I take great pleasure in bringing you these greetings this afternoon as you take time out to participate in this training webinar, done in collaboration with the Ministry of Health and Wellness and the CCFP and the AGP. This training session arises out of the desire of the Ministry of Health and Wellness, to reduce the service burden on the public health system in the aftermath of the COVID-19 pandemic. The Ministry of Health thought it would have been a wonderful idea to collaborate with the private sector to ensure a constant system and a constant standard of care. They decided to launch these training sessions so that we'll have constant, say, across the system. It is only natural that the training webinars should focus on hypertension and diabetes first, as individuals with these comorbidities account for a significant number of the fatalities from the COVID-19 pandemic. Also, diabetes and hypertension inflicts an extraordinary burden on the resources of the public sector health system, as well as on the life of our adult population. This training session is done by our very own members in collaboration with the Ministry of Health and Wellness. You'll hear from Dr. Pauline Williams-Green, Dr. Buckland, and Professor Marvin Reed. It promises to be a very dynamic, practical, and very hands-on in nature. We sincerely hope you will enjoy the session and that you will participate fully in the pre-test, and you will also participate in the post-test. And I hand you back over to Dr. Porter. Dr. Porter? Thank you.
All right, thanks, Dr. Gordon. So we're gonna try to keep it tight today. We are on schedule. I'm just making a last ditch plea for those that have not done the pre-test. The pre-test has been posted in the chat. Please monitor your chat. I'm sure the opportunity to do it, the window opportunity will close as we go along. So please do the pre-test and then there'll be a post-test after. Because if these are not done, then you won't get the CME credits that are allotted for these sessions. So we have 3 presentations today. The first one is on the diagnosis and evaluation of the patient with hypertension in the general practice environment. And I'm pleased to introduce to you, well, no stranger to many of us, is Dr. Pauline Williams-Green. She's a family physician and her practice is in Linstead, St. Catherine, and has been there since 1994. She's an adjunct lecturer at the Department of Community Health and Psychiatry at the University of the West Indies Mona campus. She has published on family medicine education and is presently involved in mixed methods research on obesity. She's also a former CCFP president for the Jamaica chapter and at the regional level as well. And she's passionate about continuing medical education for family physicians and accreditation of general practices. So without further ado, Dr. Williams-Green, I hand over to you.
Thank you so very much, Dr. Porter. Thank you for the introduction. Good afternoon, colleagues. And it's great you're all willing to give up your Sunday afternoon for some of this work, which will help us. So I am the opening batsman. I never played cricket though, but I consider this the T20 version of, the guidelines for the clinical management. And let me just share my screen so that you can all see what I am going to present. All right, so let's get going here. And let me do my slide. Okay, it usually takes a few seconds. Resume slideshow. All right, so as Dr. Porter said, I'll be focusing on the diagnosis of hypertension and the evaluation of patients who we think have hypertension. So my objectives today is to share with you how we establish the diagnosis. We will look at the definition and the cutoff points. Proper measurement of blood pressure. We'll talk a bit about home BP monitoring and evaluation of persons with hypertension. Let's get cracking, let's get bowling and batting. All right. Just mention resources. Our main resource is, of course, the guidelines, the interim guidelines, which Dr. Porter told you is available on the website. So you don't need to print the manual and dust it off ever so often. It's right there. But I consulted some other documents in preparing this talk. So we're going to be talking about the diagnosis of hypertension. And this is to make sure you don't overtreat and you don't undertreat nobody. All right? And so our definition, it's a condition in which there is sustained non-physiologic elevation of systemic blood pressure. And we know the complications that occur if blood pressure is not appropriately managed. Heart disease, ischemic heart disease, chronic kidney failure, retinopathy, cerebrovascular disease, peripheral vascular disease, and you know them all. The list goes on and on. So for a long time, physicians have known, and scientists as well, that the higher the pressure, the worse the prognosis. But there is no naturally defined cutoff point separating normal from elevated blood pressure. So there is confusion. In practice, cutoff points are usually decided by expert committees appointed by professional organizations or national, in our case, the Ministry of Health and Wellness, national agencies. And these cutoff points are based on risks associated with elevated blood pressure, balanced by the level which persons are likely to benefit from lowering blood pressure. Yes, whole heap of people in Jamaica have pressure. 34% of our population, 15 and older, we're told by our manual, have blood pressure in excess of 140 over 90 millimeters of mercury. And guess what? We know 40% of Jamaicans are unaware that they have elevated blood pressure. And of those diagnosed, only about 70% are on medication. And guess what? Those that we put on medication, only about 30% are controlled. So the majority are not properly controlled. And this is what this guideline is all about, making a difference. We're going to have the manual now.
Doc, let's stop your video really quickly. The audio isn't coming along. Let's go back one slide.
All right, I'm sorry about that.
It's okay. No, we'll fix it right now. Go back one slide for me. Right, perfect. On your screen, on your Zoom page, while you're sharing, at the bottom of your screen, you should see where it says more.
More. Yes, I do.
And then you should see where it says share computer sound. And you can check it. You can click on it.
Okay.
Let's go back to your PowerPoint now.
All right. And all right, so we're going to have that video again.
Right.
Sorry about that.
No problem.
All right, so we're going to have the video again. Let's go. Oops, not moving.
Just click on the PowerPoint and it will reactivate the slide. And then you click the next arrow. There you go. Press on the play button.
Play button. Oh yes, there it is.
Measuring blood pressure. Health practitioners should understand factors that influence variability in blood pressure readings.
Morning. Hi, Miss Williams. Good to see you this morning.
Morning, Dr. Reed.
Good.
Doc, did you pause the video?
No, I didn't. I paused I thought I was turning off my my mute, but it didn't. So I'm back on. Okay, I'm sorry about that.
Click on the video again, please.
Okay.
Yeah, there you go. Not hearing it.
Not seeing anything. Let's see. Oh God. Sorry, let me go again. All right. I thought I was turning off my mute. I'm going to share computer sound again. All right, so we're going to try one more time with the video, which tells us about measuring blood pressure.
Measuring blood pressure. Health practitioners should understand factors that influence variability in blood pressure readings.
Morning. Hi, Miss Williams. Good to see you this morning.
Morning, Dr. Reed.
Good. You're here to have your blood pressure measured this morning.
Yes, Doc.
All right, you're going to have a little time to wait. Make sure you empty your bladders before they do your blood
We'll
pressure.
do that. We'll do.
Good, good.
The measurement of the patient's blood pressure should not be done within 30 minutes of having caffeine, smoking, or exercise. Patients should be seated comfortably in a quiet room for 5 minutes before being tested, and the urinary bladder should not be full. At the first visit, measure the blood pressure in both arms. Use the arm that gives the higher reading for subsequent readings. When a blood pressure measurement is obtained in one arm followed by the other arm, and the blood pressure is substantially lower in the second arm, it is possible that the difference could be caused by acclimation. In this circumstance, blood pressure should be remeasured in the first arm. The patient should be seated comfortably, with his arms supported by a table, so the cuff is at the level of his heart. Neither patient nor the practitioner should talk during the test. Use an upper arm cuff with a blood pressure measurement device that has been validated, and ensure that the device is calibrated periodically. The blood pressure machine should be calibrated regularly. The cuff should be placed on bare skin. Ensure that shirt sleeves are not rolled up to create a tourniquet effect. A properly fitting cuff, that is, one whose bladder encircles 75 to 100% of the upper arm, should be used. Using a cuff that is too small for a large upper arm will give an erroneously high reading. Using a cuff that is too large will give an erroneously low reading. Take 2 blood pressure readings measured 1 to 2 minutes apart by either auscultation or oscillometry. The auscultation method. Auscultation of brachial artery is done with the diaphragm or bell of the stethoscope to detect the appearance and muffling or disappearance of Korotkov sounds, the first representing the systolic blood pressure and the second the diastolic blood pressure. The oscillometric method. Software in a device is used to evaluate oscillometric waveforms in the lateral walls of the upper arm during blood pressure cuff deflation and uses algorithms to estimate blood pressure. For auscultatory determinations of blood pressure, use a palpated estimate of the radial pulse obliteration pressure to estimate the systolic blood pressure. Inflate the cuff 20 to 30 millimeters mercury above this level. Deflate the cuff pressure at a rate of 2 millimeters mercury per second and listen for Korotkov sounds. Record systolic and diastolic blood pressures as the onset of the first of at least 2 consecutive beats and the last audible sound respectively. Record systolic and diastolic blood pressures to the nearest even number.
Good morning, Miss Williams, and how are you this morning?
Not bad, Dr. Reed.
Nurse has reported that your blood pressure number is 170/98. And in your case, I'm sure that she was able to measure it appropriately because you're appropriately tired, you're sleepless, and I'm sure that we would have done it with a oversized cuff. So why do you think the blood pressure is so high today?
I'm not so sure, Doc.
Are you taking your medicines every day, once per day as prescribed?
Well, I took it just before coming, but to be honest, Doc, I don't always remember, so I don't take it every day.
It is important to note the time of the patient's last dose of medication. The blood pressure readings should also be communicated to the patient both verbally and given in written form. Explain the significance of the readings and help patients interpret the results. If the blood pressure is found to be elevated initially, it should be measured again later in the visit. Use an average of at least 2 readings obtained on at least 2 occasions to estimate the patient's blood pressure.
So for somebody who has high blood pressure, we encourage you to limit the amount of salt that you take in. All right? And in order to do that, a simple strategy would be not to add salt after the food is prepared, and to ensure that you limit the amount of stuff that you take from tins. Are there any particular fruits that you like?
Yes, Doc, I love meat. I love pork and
No,
chicken.
fruits.
Fruits?
Yes.
Oh, yes, Doc, I love mango.
Okay, mango is okay, but Jamaicans tend to eat too many mangoes at one go. All right, so we would suggest that you'll just have a mango, a small mango, half of a Julie or number 11 at each sitting. All right. All right then, Mr. Williams. So I think we have some agreement or some consensus as to what we're going to try and do to address this high blood pressure numbers that you have. So firstly, you're going to try and ensure that you take your medicines every
day.
Okay. And second thing that you're going to be doing is that you're actually going to start the
Gym.
How many times a week?
3 times, at least 45 minutes to 1 hour.
That is correct. And then the third thing that we're going to have to do is we're going to have to be looking at the things that we
eat.
And in order to do that, we're going to increase the amount of fruits
and vegetables.
All right, Miss Williams. So and you're also going to need to limit the amount of salt. That is correct. So then, Miss Williams, if we do that, we can then look at your blood pressure in another 2 weeks to see how effective those strategies or interventions are. Okay?
Yes, Doc.
Special thanks to the team and especially the actors for that video, and courtesy of the Ministry of Health and Wellness, of course. I just want to highlight some points about the measurement of blood pressure. Oops. I need to return to my slide. So our tech staff have really been great thus far. Trying to get on. Okay. Let me go back to this.
No problem, Doc. Here's what we'll do. Let me stop you sharing for you real quickly.
Yes.
And you just share again, but we're seeing you perfect. We're hearing you perfectly. Really like the
Share
earrings
again.
with the headphones. It's a good look.
I share again. So I'm doing my slideshow again.
All right, and we'll just continue from where you were before.
Okay, beautiful. Just
There
want
you
to
go.
make the point that many of us do not take the blood pressure in our practices. So we need to ensure that we observe how the person's designated to do the blood pressure, observe how they do it. We are responsible for the readings we get. Highlighting some of the key points from the video, first of all, we must select an appropriate cuff size. The blood pressure cuff must be at the level of the patient's right atrium. So patients can't just hold out their arms and hold it. It should be resting at the level of the heart. Normally in our setting, it's on the desk. But if they're lying on the bed, then you may need a cushion or a pillow to support the arm so it's at the level of the heart. Sitting on an examination bed and doing the blood pressure is not appropriate. That is not correct. Please Always place the center of the bladder length over the arterial pulsation. So you saw our doctor, his cough had 2 arrows. There's a range in which he was to put it, and he placed it over the brachial artery. The lower end of the cuff should be 2 to 3 centimeters above the antecubital fossa, and the cuff should be pulled firmly so that 2 fingers would fit tightly or 1 finger would fit comfortably. The cuff, as pointed out in the video, should be inflated at least 30 millimeters mercury above the point of the radial pulse if it disappears, when the radial pulse disappears. And in our case, our patient was obviously very fat. He probably couldn't feel her radial pulse, so he went for the brachial artery. Cuff deflation should be at the rate of 2 millimeters mercury per second or per heartbeat if the rate is slow. Other points to bear in mind that the cuff bladder length should be 75% to 100% of the patient's arm circumference, and the cuff bladder width will be half of that, 37% to 50% of the patient's arm circumference. As you saw in the video, the cuff should be on bare skin. Avoid tourniquet effects. So if they have long sleeve and they roll up the sleeve, that won't work. Tell them to take off the shirt or blouse. The most frequent error in answer to your first quiz is that the cuff is too small for large arms, and this leads to falsely elevated readings. If the cuff is too large, on the other hand, you're going to still get false readings, but it will be falsely low. Always measure pressure in both hands, certainly for the first time a patient comes. If the difference is greater than 15 millimeters of mercury, then you take the higher reading. And the video spoke to acclimation. Many patients are anxious initially, and if you take the blood pressure at the end of the visit or near the end, you will find that the blood pressure reading may be lower. All right, so you take that into consideration. So we're in our office, our patient is here, and the blood pressure is equal to or greater than 140/90 millimeters of mercury. That person has high blood pressure, given that you have repeated it at least once or twice. If you have been so lucky to arrange that they do the ambulatory blood pressure measurement and the reading is greater than or equal to 130/80 millimeters of mercury, that too is a definition of hypertension. And home blood pressure measurement, if that occurs, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, if that occurs and it's more than or equal to 135/85 millimeters of mercury, that too, yes, is hypertension. So if initial blood pressure readings are between 140/90 millimeters of mercury, but less than 160/100 millimeters of mercury, there's no evidence of target organ damage, then we should read the blood pressure several times. Should be repeated on 2 other occasions. Our doctor in the video asked her to come back. Well, she's a little different, but generally, we'll ask them to do it at least twice in 1 month. And if we can get them to do home blood pressure measurements, or very fortunate if you can get ambulatory blood pressure measurements, then this can help to clarify the diagnosis. And this is spoken to in our guidelines. If our initial reading now is greater than or equal to 160/100 millimeters mercury, this patient is likely to have hypertension. And if there's no target organ damage, then have them come back in 2 weeks. A diagnosis can be established on the basis of 1 reading, a single reading of greater than or equal to 160/100 millimeters of mercury. If there's evidence of target organ damage, they've had a stroke, they have chronic kidney disease, etc., the patient should be classified as hypertensive with specific target organ disease. And this is a classification found in our guidelines. Okay, so normal, anything less than 120 systolic or less than 80 diastolic, we consider it pre-hypertension if the systolic blood pressure is between 120 and 139, or diastolic between 80 and 89. And when it goes up higher to 140 to 159, then we consider that stage 1 hypertension, or if the diastolic blood pressure is 90 to 99. Stage 2 hypertension is diagnosed when the systolic blood pressure is greater than or equal to 160, or the diastolic blood pressure is greater than or equal to 100. And we classify, the classification is according to the higher blood pressure, whether systolic or diastolic. Let's talk a little bit about home blood pressure measurements, because many of our patients, I'm sure you've found, have their own blood pressure kit, or there's a practical nurse or a nurse in the household or nearby who has a blood pressure kit. And then we've seen those on the corner who are selling blood pressure measurements for them. And this is so helpful. It can distinguish sustained blood pressure from white coat hypertension. It allows us to assess the response to antihypertensive medication. Miss Williams took her pill, but she was still elevated in blood pressure readings. It helps improve patient adherence to medication. When they do the blood pressure for themselves, they know that it's high, they are more likely to take their blood pressure. And it helps us to reduce overtreatment because we can compare our reading with theirs. And it has been shown to be equivalent to ambulatory blood pressure measurement. And how do we use this? We tell our patients to get an automated device, and it should be calibrated every 6 months. How? Simply bring them to the office and we compare them with ours, which we hope is also calibrated. We verify the use of the appropriate cuff, so they're fitting their arm, and of course, tell them to use a higher arm if there's an interarm difference of more than 15 millimeters of mercury. And the same rules apply. Patient seated, feet flat on the ground, no caffeine, bladder empty, and no exercise in the last 30 minutes, and no talking. Teach patients to do 2 consecutive blood pressure measurements at least 1 minute apart. Do it in the morning and the evening. Ideally, 7 days is good. We discard the first day and we use the average of all remaining measurements. So they come with their book, they've written down their blood pressure readings, or if they have an app or their cell phone. So, having spoken about the diagnosis, we are now going to talk very briefly about the evaluation of the hypertensive patient. So our usual hypertensive workup, urine analysis and microscopy. And this is, we're looking for protein in the urine, blood, abnormal sediments as well. Albumin creatinine ratio, our usual blood chemistries, BUN, creatinine, electrolytes, calcium, and estimated GFR. A complete blood count, lipid profile, fasting, and 2-hour postprandial glucose. And most of these are available in most labs. They give it as a hypertensive screening package. And they cost about $6,000 in the government service. I suspect it's at no cost. We should ask for chest x-ray and electrocardiogram and abdominal ultrasound for a workup. And this will be necessary at periodic, different times along the progress of this patient. For younger patients, 20 to 40, our guidelines specifically highlights them and suggests similar tests: fasting blood glucose, complete blood count, and the serum electrolytes, creatinine, the estimated GFR, calcium, and lipid profile. And of course, although this applies to all age groups, especially this age group, we look for secondary causes of hypertension. And this is mentioned in our guidelines. They give us a chart there For chronic kidney disease, they have suggested the estimated GFR and the urine albumin excretion. For coarctation of the aorta, computed tomography and angiography. For Cushing's syndrome, the dexamethasone suppression test. And for any drug-induced or drug-related hypertension, drug screening. For pheochromocytoma, the usual 24-hour urine VMA. The primary aldosteronism, we would want to ask plasma aldosterone to renin activity ratio. And for renal vascular hypertension, Doppler flow ultrasonography. For sleep apnea, the sleep study test, which is expensive but available. And for thyroid and parathyroid disease, the TSH and the serum parathyroid hormone level. And you'll recognize one of your pre-test questions here. So we are now ready. We've made our diagnosis, we've made our evaluation, and so I've achieved our goals, and I've just been out. I've been told that I've been caught. So, but we managed to just make the diagnosis of hypertension by defining and looking at our cutoff points, doing a proper measurement of blood pressure, talking a bit about home blood pressure monitoring and evaluation of persons with hypertension. Thank you much for listening.
Okay, thanks, Dr. Williams-Green, for an excellent presentation. I'd like to highlight for the videos, it was a question in the chat. Yes, it will be made, the videos will be made available. So this is the, what you call it? This is the first time the videos are showing publicly, but the thought is that we will have them readily available on the ministry's website to support training in the public and private sector. Additionally, there was reference made to the Jamaica Health and Lifestyle Survey. On the ministry's website, there are preliminary results that can be had on the website. And there was also in the video reference made, there was a diagram that was shown with a summary of 8 critical points or requirements for measuring blood pressure. This infographic can be accessed on PAHO's website at paho.org/HEARTS for hearts. paho.org/hearts. So thanks again, Dr. Williams-Green. We will be having questions and answers now, and we'll be doing poll questions. All right, so we have a few questions. So Dr. Williams-Green is being asked, what exactly is ambulatory blood pressure?
All right, just as you have the ambulatory electrocardiogram, everybody knows about the Holter monitor. You're hearing me clearly, Dr. Porter?
Yes, I can hear you clearly.
Okay, great. So there is also ambulatory blood pressure measurement. It's a similar equipment, just about the size of a cell phone. It's attached to you. It measures your blood pressure ever so often. Not sure how often it does it. And you take it home, you wear it for 24 hours, and then you come back and they measure it. It's last I heard was about 20,000. I'm not sure how much it is now, but anybody else with further information, please chip in. But it's not something we're going to ask most of our patients to do. And we have found, and your guideline says it, and I've read it elsewhere, that equivalent to that is a home blood pressure measurement. It does not take anyway, it is not much inferior to ambulatory blood pressure readings. We just need to tell them how to do it, as we described, morning and evening, at least 7 days. In fact, when I looked at the European guidelines, they recommend 4 days, really. So you just need a series of readings to see where the blood pressure is. So home blood pressure readings are just as good, but I guess in special situations, you may require ambulatory blood pressure readings. But it's available here in Jamaica as well.
Okay, thanks for that. That question was posted by Dr. Cousins. We have a comment about the wrist automated blood pressure devices. Could you mention something about those? And that was a comment from Dr. Rattray.
Use the wrist as well. You just need to follow their instructions. Some of them say you need to hold it in front of your heart. There are some who ask you to have it at level of your heart as well. Hold it, put it on a desk, similar to the regular blood pressure kit. So you need to follow the instructions. These oscillometric meters have been validated, and they are just as accurate, it's been found, as the usual sphygmomanometer we're used to. So you just need to read what goes along with the one that you purchase. So nothing wrong with that. With using a wrist monitor as well, especially for those who may find it hard to get a cuff that fits their arm.
Okay, thanks for that response, Dr. Williams-Green. There's a comment about classification of hypertension above 130/90 for tighter control. This is a comment posted from Dr. Morgan or Arna Morgan. Is there any problem with sticking to this tighter diagnostic criterion for blood pressure? 130/90.
Thanks very much for that question. So as I was careful to point out, these cutoff points are generally accepted. There is nowhere that God has sent down a message to say what number we should cut off on. And as we have seen in moving from JNC 7 to JNC 8 in the USA, it was quite a stir when they moved it to higher levels especially for the elderly. So you need to always individualize even guidelines. And the fact is that your patients will vary. But the guidelines recommended here in Jamaica after consultation with some of the top internists is that we will use 140/90. You decide for a particular case at 130/90. For an individual, that might be just correct. I've found in my practice, the Asiatic persons from Asia, tend to have lower blood pressures. So if I see a blood pressure, perhaps 130/90, I may be a little bit more stringent with them, but the general guidelines for our population is 140/90.
Okay. So Nong is asking about using HbA1c for evaluating the patient with hypertension.
Thanks very much. The guidelines have actually said that they do not recommend HbA1c for diagnosis of diabetes. In assessing your hypertensive, our guidelines have suggested, certainly for the newly diagnosed hypertensive, that we use the fasting blood sugar and the 2-hour postprandial. But many of the packages that come from the labs include HbA1c, so we need not ignore it, but we don't use it for diagnosis. Thanks.
Okay, so I'm going through the questions in the Q&A, and I'll go through some more. I may not get through all of them, but bear in mind that typed answers will be given by the panelists as well. There's someone asking, Arnold Morgan is asking about the need to do abdominal ultrasounds to evaluate persons with hypertension. Not sure this can show adrenal involvement. So she wants some comment on the use of abdominal.
Right. No, it's not for adrenal. It's looking for aneurysms, aortic aneurysms, really. And to be honest, being a practitioner for many years, I have not used abdominal ultrasounds for screening in the first workup of our patients, but this is what our guidelines recommend. And I assume it is looking for aneurysm. I doubt whether it's for adrenal hyperplasia or anything like that.
Okay, Dr. Johnson Campbell is asking about the higher cutoff for home blood pressure monitoring. Why do we use higher readings?
On the contrary, the readings are lower. the cutoff point, which is one of the questions in your pretest, is actually 135 over 85. It is not higher. The 140 over 90 is what you use in your office setting in the medical practice.
Okay, is the Alicia Larmond is asking, is the wrist blood pressure monitor as effective as the arm blood pressure monitor?
You caught me there because I wanted to look specifically for the wrist when I was preparing this, and I didn't have the chance. I know they said the oscillometric method is just as effective, just as good, just as accurate, just as correct, and it works the same way based on the wave motions as described in your video as well. So if somebody else on the panel want to jump in, feel free, but I did not get to check the wrist, but it is as accurate and we can rely on it. Now, we wouldn't use it for in the office setting where you have, but a particular patient could use it at home and it is accurate.
A question is being asked, how do physicians calibrate their blood pressure machines, especially oscillometric types?
Right. Let me answer it in a roundabout way. We usually compare it with the sphygmomanometer, so your mercury. So you compare it, which is why you ask your patients to bring their units so that you can let them take the blood pressure in your office, observing how they do it at home, and you compare it then with your reading when you do the sphygmomanometer. How do we calibrate it? Really, you should take it at least once to twice a year to your local vendor. I won't name mine. I actually spoke with a technician about it. And I asked him, is this particular machine, does it need calibrating? No. And he says, look at your mercury, doc. The mercury is at 0. You don't need calibration. So I interpreted that to me, as long as your mercury is still at 0 and everything else is working. But from practice, ever so often, at least maybe every 2-3 years, you need to change the cuff, the bulb, etc. All right. And so we really need to check ours as well, because the patients are going to bring theirs to check against ours. You need to be also, with regard to the wrist one, I see somebody making a comment, you have to make sure that you buy a good quality kit, because if it's not of a good quality, like anything else, you buy a version that's inferior, then you're going to get in trouble, which is why you should ask them to come and do the blood pressure in your office so you can compare it with your sphygmomanometer, which is mercury driven.
All right, I'm going to ask one more question, bearing in mind that your answers posted in the Q&A section can be type answered and not necessarily live answered in the interest of time. Why is the doctor's office blood pressure higher than the home measurement blood pressure?
That's very interesting, and that's well documented. Especially for the older patients, as they get older, they seem to get more anxious and there's an anxiety. The blood pressure does go up. In fact, I've noticed where patients have a lower pressure with my nurse, and when they come into my office, it's even higher. And so it's well recognized, and it's called white coat syndrome. It's just a fact of life. Just like you have placebo effect, you have other effects, there is a white coat syndrome. Patients in the medical setting have higher readings. Not all. Some people it probably is at reverse, because there are those two who are lower in our office, but higher out when they're at home. So all of these have to be taken into consideration. But it's documented as white coat syndrome.
Okay, thank you so much. Just to address some questions about where to find the guidelines, someone posted it in the chat. It's on the ministry's website, but someone so graciously put the link in the chat for all of you that want to access it now. But when you go to the Ministry of Health and Wellness's website, on the home page, scroll to the bottom, you'll see resources with a drop-down arrow. If you click on it, the guidelines are in that list. And when you click on it, there's a PDF version you can download. Thank you so much. And I'm gonna ask our tech team to do the poll questions for us before we go into the next presentation.
Thank you so much. But when you say poll questions, I just have poll questions for Professor Reed's presentation.
Okay, no problem.
Yeah, right.
All right, no problem. Okay, so it means that we are going to go into our second presentation, second of 3 presentations for today. Welcome to those that are just joining. This is our presentation on non-pharmacological management of hypertension in the general practice environment. And I would like to introduce to you Dr. Alice Buckland. She is an adjunct lecturer in the Department of Community Health and Psychiatry at the University of West Indies, Mona, and she also has her own private practice. She has master's practitioner certifications in neurolinguistic programming, hypnosis, time techniques, core coaching, and emotional freedom techniques. She's a member of the International Board of Coaches and Practitioners. And she also currently represents the CCFP on the Caribbean Regional Hub of the Plenary Health Alliance, and is the immediate past president of the CCFP Jamaica chapter and the vice president of the Association of General Practitioners of Jamaica. She's an honorary member of the Jamaica Cancer Society, a resource person in tobacco control, an active volunteer of the Cancer Society's healthy lifestyle interventions in schools, communities, and business places. And Dr. Buckland uses her wealth of experience and expertise to inspire, empower, and transform her patients and other persons. So it's no wonder she was selected to do this presentation for us on non-pharmacological management. Dr. Buckland, over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Porter, for your kind words of introduction. Thanks also to colleagues for joining in this training workshop. Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Start broadcast. Okay, everybody seeing this slide? Can you see the slides?
Yes, we're seeing it.
Thank you. Non-pharmacologic management of hypertension in the general practitioner's environment is a very important topic, and this is based on updated 2020 Ministry of Health and Wellness interim guidelines for the clinical management of hypertension for public and private practitioners. Should I go full screen? Okay. Hypertension is a very common condition encountered in primary care. Non-pharmacologic strategies lower blood pressure. Lifestyle modification is strongly recommended as a first-line intervention in persons diagnosed with hypertension and in persons with elevated blood pressure. Laws and policies may enable a supporting environment for behavior change throughout the life course. The first modification is in the lifestyle modification is reduce weight. This is to maintain normal body weight and is reflected in a BMI of 18.5 to 24.9 kilograms per meter squared. This yields approximate reduction of systolic blood pressure ranging from 5 to 20 millimeters of mercury for every 10 kilograms of body weight lost. The second lifestyle modification is the dietary approaches to stop hypertension. This is known as DASH. The guidelines recommend that we adopt a DASH eating plan, which allows us to consume a diet rich in fruits and vegetables and low-fat dairy products with reduced content of saturated and total fat. This allows an approximated systolic blood pressure reduction range of 8 to 14 millimeters of mercury. The third modification is lower sodium intake.
Dr. Buckland?
The recommendation is to, yes?
Can you put it on slideshow, please?
Yeah. Let's see.
Press the play button at the top, Doc.
Play.
Yeah, there's a play button right beside the little guy with the plus. There's a play button to the left of him.
Oh, this. Oh, is it? Press the little guy.
No, not the little guy. The play button to the left of the little guy. The little guy is gonna get you to share. You don't want to share. You want
that's it.
the
Share,
play button.
yeah.
Right.
Present on this device. Okay.
Yeah, present on this device. Should go full screen. You're coming out. Let's X out of that and just go back to where you were. Yeah. No, well,
Okay.
all right.
Let me go back.
Let's share your screen again. Sure.
Let me go back to the play button.
The play button is fine. Let's just get back into your presentation. If it's gonna give us an issue to go presenter view, we'll just work with what it was. I think persons were able to see it. All right, yep, so your screen is being shared. Let's go back to your presentation now. All right. Okie dokie. No, cancel. You want to keep broadcasting? Cancel.
Yeah, canceled. Okay, can you see this? Oh dear.
Yep, there it is. Lifestyle medications, modification, reduce weight, adopt a dietary approaches, dietary approaches to stop hypertension.
Perfect.
Okay,
recommendation.
Fantastic.
Yep, hypertension, a very common
Would you like
condition.
me to start over?
No, you can continue from
Would
where
you
you
like
were.
me to start over?
I think you can continue from where you were.
Okay. All right. So we went through the first modification, which is to reduce weight, maintain a normal body weight, which is reflected in a body mass index of 18.5 to 24.9 kilograms per meter squared. And this allows for an approximate reduction of systolic blood pressure in a range of 5 to 20 millimeters of mercury. Our next one was to adopt the DASH eating plan, which is the dietary approaches to stop hypertension eating plan, which allows us to, which encourages us to consume a diet rich in fruits and vegetables and low-fat dairy products with reduced content of saturated and total fat. The next recommendation was to lower sodium intake. It is important to consume no more than 2,400 milligrams of sodium per day. Further reduction of sodium intake of 1,500 milligrams per day is desirable since it is associated with even greater reduction in blood pressure. And reduce intake by at least 1,000 milligrams per day, since that will lower blood pressure even if the desired daily sodium intake is not achieved. This yields an approximate systolic blood pressure reduction of 2 to 8 millimeters of mercury. The next intervention recommended is physical activity. And persons are to engage in regular aerobic physical activity, such as brisk walking, at least 30 minutes per day, most days of the week. And this will yield a 49 millimeter of mercury systolic blood pressure reduction. And the fifth recommendation in the guideline is moderation of alcohol consumption. And this, in this modification, it is recommended that men limit consumption to no more than 2 drinks per day in most men, and to no more than 1 drink per day in women and lighter weight persons. A standard drink is 12 ounces of beer, 5 ounces of wine, or 1.5 ounce of 80 proof whiskey. So for men who would take up to 2 drinks, they are allowed 24 ounces of beer, 10 ounces of wine, or 3 ounces of 80 proof whiskey. The effects of implementing these modifications are dose and time dependent and could be greater for some individuals. Now, I want all of you to look at your hand. And we're going to put each of these modifications, each of these recommendations on the thumb. We're going to put reduce weight to target. You see the thumb is kind of chubby, so we can just press into it and reduce weight to target. Let's go to the index finger, press into it. We're going to press adopt the DASH eating plan into the index finger. And then we go to the middle finger and we press reduce sodium intake into this one. And then the ring finger, we'll press increase physical activity. Just press it into the ring finger, increase physical activity into this finger. And then the little one, moderation in alcohol consumption. Press this recommendation into the little finger. So you are carrying lifestyle modification tools in your hand, and you can transfer these to your patient's hands to lower blood pressure. I'm going to provide more information on these recommendations. So the recommendation to maintain normal weight. The World Health Organization states that nearly 3 million persons die from overweight and obesity worldwide. In addition, independent of any particular disease, people with high basal metabolic indices feel better physically and psychologically when they lose excess weight. The BMI, which is a measure of body size and takes weight and height into account, does not directly measure body fat. A higher BMI is associated with higher risk of conditions linked to excess weight. A normal BMI, which is 18.5 to 24.9 kilograms per meter squared, using your height would give you an expected normal weight range. Remember, BMI ignores waist size. There are limitations to it. Persons with high muscle mass, edema, persons who are pregnant, persons who are children, and the elderly, we should be careful not to use the BMI in these people. The modification reduce weight occurs if your BMI is higher than 24.9 kilograms per meter squared. So what is your current situation? Your BMI is, and is that reading that you get an overweight reading or an obese reading for the BMI? And for those persons that we cannot use BMI on, or if we want to use the waist circumference in addition to the BMI, we can measure the person's waist You know, the patients really feel quite involved when they feel as if they're gone to the dressmaker or to the tailor to get measured. And so when we wrap the tape measure around the umbilical area, and we get a 94 centimeter for men, this person is at increased risk. And if the measurement is over 102, then the men would be at greatly increased risk. What about for women? For women whose waist circumference is 80 centimeters and more, they are at increased risk. And if the waist circumference is 88 centimeters and more, these women would be at greatly increased risk. So you want to ask your patient if he wants to lessen the number or increase it. And that actually gets the patient thinking. And I cannot think of a person who's ever said that they wanted to get a higher number. All right, now more information on DASH. Adopt a dietary approaches to stop hypertension eating plan. The DASH diet plan helps lower blood pressure, and it can do this in 2 weeks. It is rich in whole grains, fruits, vegetables, and whole fat and low fat dairy products. It limits total fat, trans fat, and saturated fat. It provides plenty of fiber, potassium, calcium, and magnesium. The DASH diet also limits sodium to between 1,500 milligrams to 2,400 milligrams a day, which is approximately 2/3 of a teaspoon to 1 teaspoon of salt. It's easy to adopt a DASH eating plan. Even small changes made gradually lead to significant benefits. DASH is for everyone in the family. We can use a free interactive online body weight planner, complimentary of the NIH, to find out how many calories you need per day to maintain or reach your target weight. Then you can fill in the what's on your plate worksheet for a few days to see how your current food habits compare with the DASH plan. This will help you see what changes you need to make. Be inspired to achieve a healthy blood pressure as you get to target weight. Adopt DASH eating plan, reduce salt, increase physical activity, and reduce alcohol. I'm going to give you some more information about the DASH plan. This is based on the 2,000 calorie DASH diet plan, and this suggests getting whole grains, 7 to 8 daily servings of whole grains, 4 to 5 daily servings of vegetables, 4 to 5 daily servings of fruits, 2 to 3 daily servings of low-fat or fat-free dairy products, 2 or less per daily serving of lean meat, poultry, and fish, 4 to 5 servings per week, notice this is per week, of nuts, seeds, and dry beans. And fats and oils, we need 2 to 3 servings per day, and the sweets, we're only allowed 5 servings of sweets per week. So what is a DASH serving size? Well, we see the fist represents a cup, and this we can use to measure cereal, pasta, rice, vegetables, and fruit. The palm, open out your palm. This can hold 3 ounces of meat, fish, and chicken. Make a little handful, and what sits in that little handful will be 1 ounce of nuts, raisins, and shredded cheese. Look at your thumb. That represents 1 ounce of hard cheese or peanut butter. The thumb tip is 1 teaspoon, and this is a serving for butter, mayonnaise, cooking oil, and sugar. And if we have 2 handfuls together, this represents 1 ounce of unsalted chips, pretzels, and popcorn. We can encourage our patients to go online and look at your guide to lowering blood pressure. I like to give my patients homework. I think they learn a lot when we give them homework. So in this book, in that brochure that I showed you, this is one of the pages in it. And it literally shows you the food group, the daily servings, and the serving sizes for the 2,000 calorie diet. So we see that for grains and non-grain products, 1 slice of bread is a serving. 1 cup of ready-to-eat cereal is a serving, and ½ cup of cooked rice, pasta, or cereal is a serving. We want a lot of vegetables. So 1 cup of raw leafy vegetables is a serving. And this can actually spread right across half of your plate. So we can draw that and show the patient that, 1 cup of raw vegetables would sit comfortably across half of your plate. ½ cup of cooked vegetables would sit on 1/4 of the plate. And then we can go 1 serving of fruit is a serving. This showed about the 8 ounces of milk is a serving. 1 cup of yogurt is a serving. Lean meats, I mentioned about the 3 ounces, which sits into the palm. The 1/3 cup of nuts, and 1 tablespoon of seeds, and ½ cup of cooked beans, which are needed 4 to 5 times per week. Mentioned here the 1 teaspoon of soft margarine, 1 tablespoon of low-fat mayonnaise, 2 tablespoons of light salad dressing, 1 teaspoon of vegetable oil, and these are needed 2 to 3 times per day. And then the sweets are limited to 5 per week, so we are allowed 1 tablespoon of sugar, and we can get that 5 times for the week, and we can also get a tablespoon of jelly or jam 5 times for the week. So your turn. How many servings of vegetables would you actually have somebody, would you tell your patient are required for a 2,000 calorie plan? What did you say? Yes, you said 4 to 5 servings. Very good. And fruit? You're a bright lot. 4 to 5 servings. Right. What about the dairy? What do you think about dairy? What you thought about dairy? 2 to 3 servings? Okay.
1 serving.
What about whole grains? 7 to 8? And what about the nuts? What about nuts you would need? And then remember, the nuts, you're going to need these per week. So can you imagine every day for 5 days for the week, 5 days of the week, you're allowed 4 to 5 servings of the nuts, seeds, and dried beans, which means that you can get 5 little packs of these nuts and take it as a treat or something that you want to munch on. And the fats and oils, we are allowed 2 to 3 servings per day. And the lean meat, we are limited in lean meat to what? 2 or less daily servings of lean meat, poultry, and fish. We can lower the servings depending on our calorie plan. So if we have a 1,600 calorie plan, we can lower the servings. Remember to refer to the brochure, your guide to lowering blood pressure. All right, so we're moving on to the next intervention, lowering sodium intake. Now this is the middle finger. This is the middle finger. Remember, the thumb is reduce weight, and the index finger is adopt the DASH plan, and the middle finger is lower sodium intake. We want to lower it to 2,400 milligrams per day or to 1,500 milligrams per day. It is shown that the more you lower the salt, the lower the blood pressure gets. Let's know some facts about our salt intake. Did you know that 75% of our salt intake is from processed foods? For example, cheese, deli meats, butter, margarine, biscuits, takeaway food, sauces and spreads, even if they don't taste very salty. Did you know that 15% of our salt intake is what we add at the table from the salt shaker, or what we also put in during our cooking, and that 10% of the salt occurs naturally in food? So what are the recommendations then if we want to lower our salt or sodium intake? Knowing that 75% is from processed foods. You're right, quite right. We want to eat fresh, unprocessed foods. We also don't add salt at the table. We may use potassium chloride as a salt substitute Instead, if allowed by the doctor, in that you're not having any heart issues that potassium would affect, and you're not having any kidney issues that potassium would affect. Very good so far. You can cut back on salt in cooking and add aromatic herbs and spices to bring out the flavor. So if you're following a recipe, you can have the salt that you're going to use in that cooking. And there are certain words that I saw when I was looking through, researching on this lower sodium intake. They have terms like low salt, salt-free, and salt-reduced. What is all of that? Well, low salt refers to up to 120 milligrams of sodium in 100 grams. And salt-free means no added salt. And so reduced salt refers to 25 to 30% less salt required of a 2,400 milligram per day allowance. Very good. So look at this now. We're going to get to our nutrition facts. You're going to tell me between the frozen peas and the canned peas, which product has the lower amount of sodium? What we want to do is look at the percent daily value, because the percent daily value helps you to compare products and tells you if the food is high or low in sodium. So you can choose products with the lowest percent daily value for sodium. Which one did you say? Ah, you're so bright. Yes, it's the frozen peas. Why? Because frozen peas are not processed. Think about it. Canned peas are processed. So you would expect a higher amount of sodium in that, wouldn't you? And in here, in this case, the canned peas had 3 times more sodium than the frozen peas. So we encourage our patients to have fresh produce and to minimize canned products. If they were really going to use the canned products, I'd really encourage them to wash it good. Wash it really, really good. The next intervention is engage in regular aerobic physical activity, such as brisk walking at least 30 minutes per day, most days of the week. So I'll ask you something. If somebody is doing brisk walking 40 minutes per day, most days of the week, is that part of the interim guidelines? Of course, because 40 minutes is more than 30 minutes. And this would actually encourage the systolic blood pressure to fall by 4 to 9 millimeters of mercury. All right, so the last modification here is the moderation of alcohol consumption. Most men are not to have more than 2 drinks a day, and women and lighter weight persons, not more than 1 drink per day. And here we see the serving size for beer. 1 standard beer is 12 ounces. Wine is 5 ounces, 1 standard size. And for 80 proof whiskey, it's 1.5. So we double that amount for the servings for men. So I know all of us are caring doctors. And in the interview, we want to actually reach out to our patients by being able to listen with our ears or eyes, giving undivided attention and listening with our heart. We want to be willing to acknowledge what the person is saying. We want to be able to explain. We want to be willing to assess family and social support. This is so important in behavior change. We want to be able to show empathy. We want to be willing to offer encouragement, hope, and reassurances. So let's reach out to our patient, resist the writing reflex. It's not about us, it's about our patient. We want to evoke and encourage the patient to talk what's in their mind, what's in their heart, versus education. The patient knows a lot, and so we can allow them to talk. We can affirm autonomy. They are the consultant in their life. How many times have you heard that a patient goes to X doctor and then comes and say, I didn't follow that person's recommendation because I thought otherwise. You can just affirm their autonomy. They're going to do whatever they decide to do, all right? And what we're there to do is to guide them. We want to actually clarify their goals, and listen out for things that are important and things that they are ready to work on. So we want to highlight the change talk, because this change talk is going to augment whatever is important for this particular condition, and what is and that they are ready to do something different. So we want to inspire our patients so that his mindset is to improve. Your blood pressure is high. What does this mean? We want to check the importance and readiness to do behavior change in these recommended modifications: to reduce weight, to adopt the DASH eating plan, to lower the sodium intake, to increase physical activity, and moderation of alcohol consumption. We have a change plan worksheet. You know, everybody wants to be happy and free. They don't want to feel as if they're being burdened by this disease or that, and they want to know that they are taking effective action. So we can engage them in this worksheet by having them fill out. Once they're ready, we find what they're ready to work on. The changes I want to make or continue making are the reasons why I want to make these changes are the steps I plan to take in changing are. I will know my plan is working if, and it's not necessarily to get to a certain weight, you know. Your plan is really working if you're consistent with the behavior. Once you're consistent with the behavior change, you're going to get the result. Some things that could interfere with my plans are, what will I do if the plan isn't working? As my doctor, you can help me keep these changes by, you know, a lot of patients just want support and they want encouragement. So I would press these modifications into the patient's thumb. They feel it. This is to reduce weight. This one is to adopt the DASH eating plan. The middle finger is to reduce your sodium intake. This ring finger is to increase physical activity, and you press it in and they're feeling the pressure. And this little finger is moderation in alcohol consumption. So as I do for my patient, I do for myself. I anchor my lifestyle interventions on my fingers to remind me to take action to lower my blood pressure every day. Are you ready to join me? Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Buckland, for a really comprehensive and excellent presentation. I'm sure many of us feel like, okay, we want to be your patient after, you know, we went through in detail the lifestyle modifications. I want to make a plug here, and to reiterate that the guidelines are on the website, but bear in mind that there are interim guidelines and the focus was on clinical management. There's a lot of pharmacological management in there. So Dr. Buckland really did expound on a lot of the lifestyle modification elements of management that may not necessarily be in the interim guidelines. However, the ministry is working towards doing the comprehensive guidelines soon. Okay, so we're going to move into our Q&A. So some of you would have been aware that some answers that may not have been addressed openly or live would have been answered in type. Dr. Williams-Green, be on standby just in case any questions. We have time to go to some of the questions from your presentation. So I'm going to ask the first one, which is, it may have been answered earlier. Okay. So firstly, Dr. Buckland, DASH applies to pregnant persons, and if what does it apply to pregnant persons, and if so, what gestational age?
DASH is applied throughout the life course. And so you want to, this is where the obstetrician and gynecologist will come in. They need to be aware that this is a really, really healthy plan. It is safe for anybody. It is safe for anyone. It's really addressed for adults, but eating fruits and vegetables along the life course is certainly fantastic, especially when we look at what is happening with the children who are growing up and they see certain things being modeled in their schools. The fast food chains are in there. And I think we, as a country, should look at what we want to do different about this, you know, but I know the government will know what to do. So I would leave that to the obstetricians and gynecologists. If a pregnant person comes to me, then it would be whatever their body weight required, because it's very healthy. It's including everything that they need for a safe and healthy pregnancy.
Okay,
And you see, it
thanks.
includes a lot of calcium as well.
Okay, thanks for that, Dr. Buckland. That question was from William Brown, and he's also asking, what is sea salt? Is there any difference from normal salt?
I know the sea salt, I don't think the sea salt has iodine, or it doesn't have much. And so that's why the iodized salt. So if William is saying normal salt is iodized salt, then yes, there's a difference. People who do not take iodized salt, I see that they have the issues getting goiters. And when I actually ask them, tell me what happened to your neck and what did you do differently, especially in the last 6 months, they didn't have that swelling, and it's sea salt or pink salt or some different salt, not iodized salt. And then that puts me into asking them to do all kind of different investigations, because I need to know what this mass in the neck is. And it comes back down to they were not using iodized salt. And then once they included it again into their diet, the swelling went down.
All right, thanks for that. So there's a question about persons that are illiterate. Could you give some advice on the easiest way to explain DASH to them? And not just those that are illiterate, but perhaps persons with other disabilities?
Right, so go to a Jamaican market. It is fantastic. It has a lot of fruits, it has a lot of vegetables. It is just wonderful to see the lovely colors there, and they can pick anything that they want. I think for Jamaicans, we would want to have our fruits and vegetables probably at a more affordable price. So, you know, the government can actually look at what it can do to help the growers make it more affordable for persons. Because once we actually have people eating more fruits and vegetables, we're going to actually need less medication. We'll have a healthier population.
All right, thanks for that. An anonymous attendee is asking about the effects of sleep habits or advising on sleep habits as part of the non-pharmacological methods of reducing blood pressure.
Right. Now, I respect sleep very much. I want to get my sleep. In this guideline, sleep was not one of those highlighted. And in fact, in another guideline I looked at, they were only talking about sleep apnea. However, sleep is so important because it allows us to recover. It allows us to have homeostasis, for things to be in balance. It allows us to repair. Indeed, natural killer cells are on patrol as we sleep to remove precancerous cells and cancerous cells from our body. So once we actually can get our shut eye, you get our deep sleep and our rapid eye movement sleep, we're going to actually be repaired. So we need to actually have a routine it's what you call sleep hygiene. And I'll go through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which is one, you're going to have a set bedtime. One set bedtime. If it's 10 o'clock, then you want to turn off the lights 1 hour before. You see, we go to sleep, our eyes are actually sensors. They're not just for seeing, they're sensors. So when this sensor, the eye sensor, picks up darkness, it triggers a response to allow us to go to sleep. So we need to turn off the lights, dim the lights an hour before. So we'll have one sleep schedule, a set sleep time. Number two, no caffeine, literally no caffeine. If our bedtime is 10 o'clock, no caffeine from 2 p.m. because it takes 8 hours for that caffeine to wear off. 3 hours before bedtime, we want to actually have no alcohol. 4 hours before bedtime, no exercise. Because if you exercise in the evening, trust me, you're not going to sleep. It's not coming to you. And number 5, you want to actually wake up really early, like 5 o'clock in the morning, and give the sun a high five. I know the sun isn't really out at 5, but just get up and go out and have a fresh, revitalizing morning walk. And just thank God for the day and give thanks. So that would be sleep hygiene. And I agree, it is so important.
Okay, and 2 persons, this is the final question. 2 persons are asking about accessing potassium chloride salt. Where can doctors get this?
No, I have never actually seen potassium chloride salt. They probably have salt substitutes in the supermarket or in the pharmacy. I believe there are salt substitutes because it was mentioned in what I was reading. You can literally use celery. I've been practicing this dash thing, you know, and I know we have been in lockdown, so many of you have not seen me, but I have slimmed down. I have slipped down and I feel terrific, right? So anybody, the best Christmas present you can give yourself, do the dash diet and see it for yourself, because once you prove it for yourself, you're going to be living evidence and testimony for your patient. And what a way to bring in the new year, you know? But we want to actually do this every day. All right, so.
Thanks for that, Dr. Buckland. And I see where Professor Reed has posted in the chat a link on no salt, sodium-free salt alternatives.
Not Professor Reed, that's me. I don't want him to get in trouble. It's okay. It's okay.
Sorry about that.
But remember, there's this brochure that the National Institute of Health put out, lowering blood pressure. And it's a very easy read for those who are literate. For those who are not, trust me, just holding your patient's hand and just going through the intervention. Because they're going to say, doctor's holding my hand, and you just press that thumb. You see the thumb is chubby. We can lose the weight and we can lose the waist. And we're going to do this by doing the DASH diet. We're going to lower sodium. We're going to be physically active, and we're going to have alcohol in moderation. And just go through the fingers. They learn it. You know how quick they learn songs? They can learn this. And then they travel with their hands. And then when they go home, they're going to tell their family what they learned at the doctor today. And then the family also learns it. What a wonderful way for this to spread.
Thank you so much, Dr. Buckland. That was absolutely excellent. And we have gone through all our questions. Okay, there's a medication question in the chat that just popped up, but I'm going to leave that for our last presentation because it speaks to medication. At this time, I'm going to let the tech team do poll questions for both Dr. Buckland and Dr. Williams-Green's presentations.
No problem. Thank you so much, guys. So on your screen, you should see a pop-up. It's allowing you to vote now. So which statement is true about the relationship between lowering blood pressure and cardiovascular outcomes? And we'll give about 30 seconds for persons to answer this one. You may have seen it in your pre-test for everyone who did their pre-test before. So let's see what the answers look like. And then we have 2 more questions. After that, we go back to our moderator. All right, 15 more seconds. 5 seconds. 4, 3, 2, And we're seeing on the screen there now, these were the results. Professor Reed, Dr. Buckland, Dr. Williams-Green. Overwhelming 95% of the persons polled say that there is positive association of blood pressure reduction with cardiovascular outcomes.
That's correct.
We're happy with them.
All right, so we'll go to one more question here. And quick one, true or false? We give another 30 seconds. All patients with hypertension or elevated blood pressure will benefit from strategic non-pharmacological lifestyle modification, AKA the DASH. 10 more seconds. All right. This one is a landslide victory as well. 5, 4, 3, 2. Overwhelming true here. So I'm sure we're happy with this one as well.
Yes, we're happy.
Definitely.
Correct.
Definitely. All right. That means that, well, really smart audience. Everyone's listening. And we do this poll and then we hand over. So again, 30 seconds to vote. Which of the following is not a reason for referral to higher level of care? Not a reason. We have 15 seconds remaining. We have 5, 4, 3, 2. And these are the results.
Okay, that's a reasonable response. The vast majority of persons have indicated 4, which is the correct answer in this circumstance.
All right, perfect. All right, so wonderful. Hand over again to you, moderator. Thank you so much.
Okay, thanks for that. And we are at our third and final presentation for today on pharmacotherapy, a systematic approach to treatment of patients with hypertension. And everybody here knows this presenter, because if you were here earlier and saw the video, then he was one of the star actors. But if you don't know him, Professor Marvin Reed is the Deputy Dean of the Graduate Studies and Research, Graduate Studies and Research at the University of the West Indies, Mona, and is the past director of the Tropical Metabolism Research Unit at the Caribbean Institute for Health Research, and an associate lecturer in the Department of Community Health and Psychiatry at the university. His research interests span the gamut of community medicine, clinical trials, and human metabolism. He has co-authored over 140 peer-reviewed articles and has received the Mona Campus Principals and Vice Chancellor's Award for Research Excellence, as well as other international awards for research publications. Professor Reed practices family medicine and has a group practice. He is a member of the Family Medicine Specialty Board at UWI, which advises on postgraduate family medicine training. He's a member of several national, regional, and international professional bodies, such as the World Organization of National Colleges, Academies, and Academic Associations of Family Practitioners, or otherwise known as WONCA, the Medical Association of Jamaica, American Physiological Society, as well as a member of the Research Advisory Committee of the Caribbean Public Health Agency, CARPHA. And he is the current president of WONCA North America and president of the CCFP. Prof. Reed, over to you.
All right, thank you for those kind introductions, Dr. Rowe. Hopefully you're all hearing me very well. I am as Dr. Williams-Green indicated, the night watchman, and then I hope to carry you through the final leg of the proceedings. As we mentioned at the introduction, these are interim guidelines mainly to facilitate the co-sharing or the co-management of individuals in the public sector and in the private sector as part of the plan that the ministry has to co-manage these patients, especially during the course of this epidemic. On my opening slide, I've again listed the link to where it is that you can find it. And we hope as part of the efforts to disseminate information to also share these guidelines with you through our association. All right, so moving along, the objectives of the talk today is really, I'm going to describe the benefits of blood pressure lowering, which I think is supposed to be familiar with most of us. Describe in a little bit more detail the Ministry of Health and Wellness treatment algorithm, review the classes of antihypertensive medications, the pharmacological approaches to hypertension management when associated with comorbidities, the indications for referral, some of the factors that affect medication compliance, and just broadly end with what I call guideline developments, what's on the horizon. So a meta-analysis of clinical trials that have been performed over the last decade basically demonstrates that there is a positive relationship between blood pressure reduction, especially viewed within the context of systolic blood pressure, and any major cardiovascular event. And as we can see through this slide, the slope is consistent in terms of the greater the reduction, the greater the benefit. When we look at it in terms of absolute numbers, we see that the data provides us with evidence for all the subcategories of cardiovascular events: coronary artery disease, strokes, heart failure, and what is called all-cause mortality. With renal failures, there is some limitation that the upper confidence interval crosses 1, but broadly speaking, we think that the lower the blood pressure, the better the outcome. So the Ministry of Health and Wellness guideline algorithm suggests that if it is that you're classified as stage 1 hypertensive, and here we say that as a reminder that your systolic is between 140 and 159, and or your diastolic is between 90 and 99, those individuals should be treated with drug therapy. Especially if it is that they have other high-risk factors such as cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and chronic kidney disease. If they're otherwise healthy, they have no other risk factor, then one may consider a lifestyle modification intervention as described by Dr. Buckland in the earlier presentation for about a 3 to 6 months period. Failure of that process, though, would result in us initiating pharmacological therapy. If you're diagnosed as having stage 2 hypertension, which is, for the purposes of this guideline, having a systolic blood pressure of 160 and or a diastolic of greater than 100, then we should initiate blood pressure medication or pharmacotherapy immediately. If it is that you are considered to be a hypertensive urgency or emergency, then we would also institute the protocol dealing with those. Broadly speaking, the overall goal of therapy is to get your systolic and diastolic below 140/90. In certain special circumstances, we may aim for 130/80. And so if it is that we can achieve that without significant side effects in our patient, that represents a reasonable secondary goal. So the antihypertensive drug classes that we have are familiar to most of us. So we have our diuretics, or renin-angiotensin drugs that works on the sympathetic nervous system, and our calcium channel blockers. Within these drugs, there are different major classes. So for example, under the diuretics, we have our thiazide diuretics, we have our loop diuretics, and we have our mineralocorticoid receptor antagonists. Under our renin-angiotensin, we have our angiotensin converting enzyme inhibitors. or angiotensin receptor blockers, and of course, or renin inhibitors. And certainly under the sympathetic class, you have beta blockers, alpha and beta blockers, alpha blockers, and those that work centrally. Broadly speaking, blood pressure from a physiological perspective is really the product of your cardiac output and your vascular resistance. So most drugs that we will have at our disposal will work either at the level of the cardiac output and or the level of vascular resistance. A lot of drugs will have what we call cross properties, meaning that they will affect cardiac output and affect vascular resistance simultaneously, but the main effects may be on one side versus the other. And this diagram really just illustrates the cross-fertilization, if you want to use that term, between the various drug classes in terms of their direct mechanism of actions in affecting either cardiac output and or vascular resistance. So according to our Ministry of Health and Wellness guideline, the preferred drug for initial therapy is really going to be coming from your class of calcium channel blockers, diuretics, or your ACE/ARB. Typical examples that you will find in those classes include amlodipine and nifedipine for the calcium channel blockers. For your diuretics, we have indapamide and hydrochlorothiazide. And under your ACE/ARB, you have enalapril, lisinopril, ramipril, losartan, valsartan, and telmisartan. Those are the more common ones that you will find in our environment. Our second line therapy, which also as well as therapy that we can use for resistant hypertension and for hypertension from other sources or other causes, secondary hypertension in particular, you may have your beta blockers. So in that group, you have your carvedilol, your atenolol, and bisoprostol. For resistant hypertension, you have your MRAs, which is the spironolactone in our case. And the other broadly drugs that we use include hydralazine, alpha-methyl-dopa, and furosemide. So I'm now going to turn my attention, broadly speaking, to giving some broad overview, some broad summary measurements or summary guidance as to our approach for treating hypertension with associated comorbidity. And in this particular slide, I've basically focused on diabetes and chronic kidney disease. As we outlined in the previous slide, our goal here is to get the blood pressure to be less than 140/90. And the drugs of choice certainly would be any member from the first line group. And if you have chronic kidney disease, the specific first line group members that we advocate would be your ACE or your ARB. If you have heart failure and your ejection fraction is decreased, usually we proceed along what is called a medical directed ladder or step approach, in which you would start with an ACE, a beta blocker, and then add spironolactone for further blood pressure control. Overall aiming to get to goal, which is at least 104, less than 140/90. Certainly if you have heart failure and your ejection fraction is preserved, the key strategy here is to avoid volume overload, and the drug of choice typically is your diuretic, then your ACE or ARB. And the goal here is really to aim for a lower blood pressure in the regions of about 130/90. If you have ischemic heart disease or atrial fibrillation, certainly for ischemic heart disease, one of the choice medication would be that of a beta blocker and your ACE. Clearly, if your angina is not well controlled, we will then add a calcium channel blocker. For atrial fibrillation, we will start with an ACE, but add a calcium beta blocker if heart rate control is important. A special group of individuals who will encounter quite frequently in our practice is the elderly. For the purposes of the guideline, they divided elderly as those 80 and above and those 80 years and younger, below 80 years, I'm sorry. And so here, we will initiate treatment if your blood pressure is above 150/90, and the goal here is to try and bring the blood pressure below 150. So that is if you're 80 years and above. If you're less than 80 years, we accept that we can start or initiate treatment if your blood pressure is equal or to 140/90 and above, and the goal is to get you to less than 140/90. Certainly in pregnancy, if it is that you have chronic hypertension, so this is not preeclampsia now, so this is a pregnant woman who has had hypertension during the pregnancy, the treatment of choice tends to be methyl-dopa. We may use nifedipine and labetalol as well. And the goal here is to try and get your systolic between 110 to 135 and your diastolic between 70 to 85. If you're like the vast majority of Jamaicans, that is you're Black, and you don't have heart failure or chronic kidney disease, and your blood pressure is above 140/90, the agent of first choice would be a diuretic or a calcium channel blocker. Broadly speaking, all treatments are associated with possibilities of adverse reactions or side effects. Some of the more typical side effects by class is listed on this slide. So clearly with diuretics, some of the considerations include hypokalemia, allergic reaction, and if you're using spironolactone or mineralocorticoid receptor antagonist, you worry about breast enlargement in males. For beta blockers, it's really dizziness, fainting, weakness, and fatigue. For ACE, the notorious dry cough, headache, dizziness, fainting, and in some circumstances, it may cause deterioration in renal function. In your calcium channel blockers, especially amlodipine, you worry about swelling of the ankles, flushing, and dizziness. And if you're using alpha blockers, the main significant side effect is that of postural hypotension. So frequently, we will encounter in our practice the whole scenario or the whole concept of whether or not these antihypertensive medications affect sexual function. And that's one of the main reasons offered by especially our male patients as to the reason for non-compliance or non-adherence to their antihypertensive medication or reluctance to initiate antihypertensive medications at all. We recognize that sexual function is affected not only by or share common risk factors with cardiovascular diseases. So smoking, elevated blood pressure, the presence of dyslipidemia, and diabetes are all shared as terms of cardiovascular disease and as causes of male erectile dysfunction. And the common basis for this is, of course, we have endothelial dysfunction, which is common to both problems. We also must recognize as well that erectile dysfunction may be a sentinel sign for later cardiovascular disease or coronary artery disease. But broadly speaking, we recognize that in our repertoire, in our menu of options that we have for antihypertensive treatment, the sexual dysfunction or erectile dysfunction are more often attributable to diuretics and beta blockers. And typically ACE, ARBs, and calcium channel blockers tend to be neutral. So we can reassure our patients that if it is that they do experience any of these effects, and it is attributable, or we believe it is attributable to the medications, there are classes of medications that we have that is available that we can use to minimize or mitigate this side effect. Once it is that we start or managing our patients with hypertension, they should be encouraged to come back to us for review. There are many, certainly in terms of our review, there are certain important considerations. So we need to ensure that we take a history. And within the history, we need to focus primarily on whether or not there's been any new problems, which may be, as family physician, not only new medical problems, but new social issues, new psychological issues that may impact upon their compliance and on their blood pressure control. We also should make some inquiry about their adherence and how well it is that they're taking their medical. Certainly, we should do a physical examination, and physical examination here encompasses bedside point of care assessment. So that may mean measurements of their peripheral circulations using the brachial, radial, femoral, tibial measurements. It may involve assessment for other target organ dysfunctions, fundoscopy, and those sort of things, measuring their waist measurements, measuring their waist stick measurements. And the whole idea here is really to assess whether or not there is developing target organ dysfunction. And of course, we have the laboratory tests that we will request periodically to assess functions. Again, the aim here is to assess whether or not they're progressive. Typical laboratory tests that we will do involve their UNEs, as well as occasionally we'll do their LFTs. But more importantly, we will assess the level of protein urea. So when should we refer? Ideally, we should refer whenever there's any clinical suspicion of secondary hypertension. This person has resistant hypertension, meaning that they're on 3 or more blood pressure medication maxed out and their blood pressure is still elevated in stage 2 category. If they have significant target organ damage, we should manage these patients in collaborations with our internists. And of interest, the ones that we should manage in collaborations is those with heart failure and chronic kidney disease. Certainly, if they have hypertensive urgency, that would be indication to refer upwards, hypertensive emergency as well as whether or not we suspect they may have pheochromocytoma. A particular aspect of the history that I mentioned earlier had to be looking at whether or not they were adherent to their medications. Non-adherence increases morbidity and mortality, and in course increases healthcare costs. The World Health Organization has identified 4 main factors that affect adherence. The issues related to the condition itself, issues related to the therapies itself, patient-related factors, their own cultural belief, and of course the healthcare system, which will affect affordability and accessibility of medications. So we're going to share a little video now about adherence.
The notes that the average non-adherence rate among patients with non-communicable disease, like hypertension and diabetes, is 50%. Causes of non-adherence to medication can start with the patient.
Prof, can you pause for a second? Hold on.
Of the physician.
Pause for a second. The sharing kicked off. Let me play the video and we get your PowerPoint back up in the meantime.
Okay.
The World Health Organization notes that the average non-adherence rate among patients with non-communicable disease, like hypertension and diabetes, is 50%. Causes of non-adherence to medication can start with the patient, but there are also characteristics of the physician and the medication itself that are associated with non-adherence.
Good morning, Mr. Jackson, and how are you this morning?
Morning, Doc. I'm doing good. How are you?
Well, I'm fine, I'm fine, but I don't really have good news for you, Just looking through your charts, your nurses indicated that your blood pressure is a little high this morning, higher than it normally is.
Really, Doc? And I feel good?
You're feeling good? Well, what we're seeing here is not really good news. Are you taking the medications?
Doc, to be honest, maybe 2 or 3 times for the week. I'm missing up.
You're missing up. Okay, but in order for you to benefit or to get the desired benefit from the blood pressure tablets, you need to be taking them at the right frequency, that is the right amount of times for the day, as well as the right amounts of tablets during the course of the month in order for you to benefit well from the medication.
Boy, Doc, I'm going to have to try and improve that, but work gets in the way, some kids to pick up, everything.
Okay. Is there any other challenge that you have with the medication?
You know what, sometimes when I take it, I get a little headache and, I don't really want to feel it. I don't want to live on the medication.
Oh, that's interesting.
Poor communication between doctor and patient can result in the patient not understanding his or her medical condition or what the medication is expected to do. A doctor-patient relationship which lacks trust and mutual respect results in the patient dismissing the recommendations and instructions given. Doctors who know their patients well will readily explore issues underlying non-adherence.
You see, the things that you want to do, which is the exercise as well as changing the diet, are good things. But unfortunately, because of the height, the level, the severity of your blood pressure, they will not be able to get the control or to get the numbers that we need in order for you to benefit effectively. So in your case, you really would have to be taking the medicines in order for you to get the full benefit. So exercise is good, diet is good, but diet, exercise, and medicines are the best. You see, if you look at your blood pressure like a sponge, okay? And what the medication is would then be your hand squeezing that sponge, all right? So what happens when you take your medicines? It squeezes the sponge and get the blood pressure lower and everybody is happy. But the moment you stop taking the medicines in terms of the frequency and in the amount, in this case, what you're doing with your hands is that you're releasing the sponge, the blood pressure is going to go back to this natural state, which in your case is high. But what we do know is that individuals who have the blood pressure in the high state, they die earlier than they should. They end up being sicker than they should because they end up with damage to their hearts, they end up with damage to their kidney. They may even end up with damage to the brain. They get strokes. They may also have eye problems. So for your sake and for the sake of your family, who's your wife?
She's good. She's doing all right.
Don't you think she wants to see you around for a very long time?
Definitely, because we have one on the way.
Exactly.
Discussions on adverse effects are an essential component of improving adherence to medication. Doctors should ensure the relevant medical personnel are readily accessible for advice or intervention when introducing a new drug in the patient's medication regimen. Advice of possible side effects of prescribed medications while highlighting why the particular drug is best for the patient's condition. And advise patients on what to do if adverse effects occur.
Take the medications how often?
Twice per day, every day.
So apart from forgetting, are there any other issues? Do you have problems accessing the medications? Do you have problems in affording the medications?
I'm pretty comfortable in getting the medication.
Okay, because you should be aware that the National Health Fund has a program where you can actually have access to these medications at a discounted price. And all that we would need for you to access that service is to get you registered with the National Health Fund.
Complicated regimens fall prey to non-adherence, especially for patients with non-communicable diseases. The greater the number of doses per day, the less likely patients will comply.
Welcome, Mr. Jackson.
Hi, Doc.
Come and have a chat. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good here, Doc. How are you?
I'm good. Well, nurse has a bit of a good news today. She reports here that your blood pressure numbers are now normal.
All right, that's good.
Excellent. How is your sex life?
It's good, man.
Good, because lots of men are of the view that blood pressure medications will cause them to have erectile problems, meaning that they will not be hard enough to have sex. But the truth is that the disease is far more dangerous than the blood pressure medication.
Ask at follow-up visits about any adverse events which are thought to be associated with prescribed medications. Be ready to discuss the risks versus benefits of the medication when patients express concern about side effects or symptoms or signs which are thought to be due to the medication. And be willing to negotiate with the patient in favor of the best possible outcomes for the patient.
And I really appreciate the way that you explained everything to me. I fully understand, and I'm fully and ready to cooperate with taking my medication.
Excellent. So with that, I'm so happy. So we can now schedule you for the normal 3 months checkup to ensure that we keep on track, all right? Because as I explained, hypertension may affect the kidneys, the heart, the brain. And so it's important that you maintain your 3 monthly checkup to ensure that we can monitor whether or not there's any damage done to any of these organs.
All right, thank you so much, Doc.
So we will see you in another 3 months' time and continue doing what we have discussed.
Sure.
All right, thank you again, Mr. Jackson, and have a good day.
All right, over to you, Doc. Let's see if we can get your presentation back where it was. Wonderful video.
So in summary, colleagues, controlling hypertension is important. There are a wide range of pharmacological therapy available for hypertension control, and choice depends on comorbidities, patient factors, and drug efficacy. Physicians need to be vigilant for progression, side effects, and non-adherence. And I've coined a useful acronym, which you may wish to use, which is physicians need to be aware of presence. Management of non-communicable disease, of which hypertension is just an example, is best effected using a chronic care model, which is a model that the Ministry of Health and us are using. And in this model, we acknowledge the participation of our communities, the health system, and a proactive patient in order to ensure that we have effective and good outcomes. So I'll just close by just highlighting, for the benefits of my audience, what is happening in what we call the evidence ecosystem. So broadly speaking, the management of any chronic diseases has been improved through the evolution or development of various guidelines. The mechanisms of production of those guidelines, however, are relatively static and go through a particular set of cycles. The challenge you have oftentimes is that the data that is produced often takes a long period of time. There's a long lag time between that data and when it is brought to you as a practitioner for you to be able to utilize it for the care of your patients. And within that context, there's been a move afoot to actually speed through that process a lot more, which is what we call the digitalization of the evidence-based ecosystem. And one organization that is devoted to that is called magicevidence.org. I've mentioned it to say that one of the product of these kinds of activities is the creation of what we call live guidelines. That is, guidelines that are updated fairly quickly, and you have them in digital format for your use. So while we go through this process now of creating and familiarizing ourselves with these interim guidelines, we can rest assured that in the very near future, what you would have in your possession would be what we call live guidelines, guidelines that are updated hot off the press, so to speak, as soon as the evidence is processed and is considered reliable. So with that, I would just want to say a big thank you to the Ministry of Health and Wellness, Dr. Julia Porter-Rowe, Dr. Nicholas Skyers, who provided the guidance as well as the interim guidelines for us to share with you. The president of the HYPERTENSION, which is Dr. Donald Gordon, Dr. Buckland, who straddles both organizations of CCFP and HYP, And for CCFP Jamaica chapter, Dr. Seni Onanuja, who is our president, and Dr. Pauline Williams-Green, who presented today on behalf of CCFP Jamaica. I'm Marvin Reed, and it's been a pleasure having this good discussion with you, and I'll take questions now.
Thank you, Professor Reed, for an excellent presentation. This was our third and final presentation for today, but we do have some questions and answers that we'd like to address. So firstly, there's a question from Wright Ricketts. How do you advise the patients regarding the time interval between taking medication and consuming alcohol?
All right, so that's a vexation question, and we're now moving into the Yuletide season. Ideally, the vast majority of our medications, the patient should not be consuming alcohol concurrently. On an average, I would say in practical terms that they should at least be giving themselves at least an hour between alcohol consumption and taking their medicine.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Prof. There was a question earlier that I took note of that I didn't read out loud, but I think it's very relevant here since we've done both non-pharmacological and pharmacological interventions. The question was asked about when to transition from lifestyle modification only to medication. That question was asked by Benton earlier, about an hour earlier.
All right, so according to the guidelines, lifestyle modifications are really for those individuals who are considered to be stage one hypertensive without any significant presence or evidence of target organ damage. And in that context, it is thought reasonable to allow 3 to 6 months of lifestyle modification to see if you're able to get their blood pressure at goal, which is less than systolic 140, diastolic 90. If you're unable to get them to goal after this period, then it's advisable to start pharmacotherapy.
All right, thanks, Prof. How to deal, someone is asking about dealing with the patient with dementia. Is it possible? Well, okay, dealing with the patient with dementia, in particular, I suppose how it relates to non-adherence and them guiding them in their management.
All right, so family physicians, our index or unit of care often is the family and not just the individual. And so if it is that we suspect that the individual has cognitive defects, which is affecting adherence, the idea here is to treat the family and not just the individual. So invite the family or significant other, partner, son, brother, sister, to be part of the consultation and enlist their help in trying to ensure that the index patient is compliant with their medication.
Okay, someone is asking about the role of IVF, which I'm assuming is intravenous fluid, in the as a routine for managing hypertensive emergencies.
Well, I'm not aware of IVF being a part of the care of hypertensive emergencies. So I'm not sure, can't offer a comment there. I'm not aware of that being a standard or recommended practice.
Okay, the questions are coming in fast and furious. So bear with me a little bit. Okay, there's a question about comorbidities and pregnancy. Well, does this apply to, the use of diuretics and ACE inhibitors? Does this apply to the entire Black population or just the pregnant population?
All right, so let me see if I can dissect that question into its various components. So the first thing first is that there's some concern about the efficacy of ACE inhibitors, generally speaking, in Black individuals, since the vast majority of Black individuals are characterized by being what we call low renin. In practical terms, what we have found throughout the various clinical trials is that ACE inhibitors and ARBs are indeed effective. However, as first-line drug therapy, most guidelines, including ours, recommend that for the asymptomatic individual, Black individual, you should go first with a diuretic and a calcium channel blocker as your first choice, and then you can add ACE or ARB thereafter. With regards to pregnancy, the vast majority of data that we have about safety of the drug in the fetus from a clinical perspective is with methyl dopa, aldomet. And so it tends to be the first choice, the first drug of choice for our pregnant ladies. And then the second lines would be the calcium channel blockers. For the most part, because of animal studies, we try to refrain from using ACE and ARBs in our pregnant women. I hope I've covered the breadth of the question.
Okay, Dr. Judith Leiber is asking about the benefit of treatment in persons with pre-hypertension. Can you give us some insights into that?
Sure. All right, so the first thing first is that this is a training webinar that we're collaborating with the Ministry of Health on the interim guidelines. This interim guideline does not have a classification for pre-hypertension. I recognize, however, that some other guidelines may have indeed created such a category, in which case your systolic blood pressure is over 130, and your diastolic blood pressure is between 80 to 90. In those circumstances, there is some data that, especially if you have additional risk factors, that treatment of those to get your blood pressure to a lower state may be beneficial in terms of your long-term cardiovascular outcome. But as Dr. Williams-Green emphasized, it's really an individualized assessment that you will have to make. But for the purposes of this guideline and following the recommendation within this guideline, as of now, those individuals do not need any other treatment apart from follow-up.
Sorry. Someone is asking about eating grapefruits and taking blood pressure medication. Could you give us some insights?
All right, so the consideration here with grapefruit has to do with the fact that it affects the metabolism or metabolic disposal of certain drugs, and therefore may interfere with the activity or action or efficacies of some of our antihypertensive drugs, especially some of our calcium channel blockers. And so the recommendation here is that really and truly you should not be consuming grapefruit and those drugs simultaneously. We usually ask that you give us probably about 2 to 3 hours time differential before you do that. That's really where that comes from.
Okay. Leroy Heyman is asking, should suspected cases of secondary hypertension be investigated by the physician, the family physician, prior to referral for secondary care?
All right, so what we're trying to do in practice, on a systematic level, systematic means health system level, is to try to get a seamless movement of our patients. Right now, we tend to operate almost in silos. So you have public patients, you have private patients. These initiatives is trying to provide for our patients a more seamless through our access to the health system for better outcomes. So when it comes to patients that we should refer upwards, and I had a slide that dealt with that, the key element is that if it is that you suspect that the person may have secondary hypertension, really and truly, we should refer that individuals for full evaluation at a higher level, meaning to an internist, whether through the public system or through the private system. You may have, or you will have some data, because assuming that you made the diagnosis, you would have some data as well as some clinical records, which would substantiate those impressions. And the important thing is to be able to share those data with the referred doctor so that the patients don't have to start over. So the short answer is that on suspicion of secondary hypertension is really when you should refer.
Okay, a question for you and perhaps Dr. Buckland as well. Many patients take garlic and skip their medication. What is your view on this practice and how will you advise those patients?
All right, so the data on garlic is as follows. The amount of garlic that you actually need to show a substantive amount of blood pressure reduction is actually quite high. Most people don't take that. Most people just take a little peg of garlic. And so the effect on your blood pressure is actually going to be very minimal with that small amount of garlic. We do know that there's data that does say that garlic taken in these proper amounts will cause some small reductions in your blood pressure, typically about 2 millimeters of mercury. But as I pointed out in the video, that Aaron's video, the effects of a lot of these lifestyle modifications, the maximal effects you're likely to get is probably in about 5, maximum 10 millimeters of mercury. And for some individuals, that might not be enough. And so the recommendation is that you're not to do it instead of, but to do it with your medication so that you can derive the full benefits from the approach. Because the benefit accrues because of the lowering of the blood pressure, not so much from the specific agent that caused the lowering.
Okay, Dr. Buckland?
Yes, I agree with Prof. In addition, for the pre-hypertension questions that have been coming up, it has been recommended in other guidelines that the lifestyle modification is the way to go. So we're talking about reducing the weight. We're talking about using the DASH diet, eat plan. We're talking about lowering the salt. We're talking about physical activity, and we're talking about alcohol moderation, in moderation. All of these are used for pre-hypertension. They are very effective for pre-hypertension because what you want to do is to delay progression. And you can actually reverse it because the person has not reached hypertension. So they just need to correct certain things that they're doing. Actually, I have some nutrients that would actually help with their physical repair and follow through. And then just monitor and see what the results are. So the lifestyle modification is the way to go for pre-hypertension.
Okay, thanks, Dr. Buckland. There's a question about the pediatric population, and given that nowadays we're seeing an increase in hypertension in the pediatric population in Jamaica, what do our guidelines recommend about the pediatric population? Dr. Skiles can also give a comment on this.
All right, so this specific guideline does not address this specific subpopulation that we classify as pediatrics, that is those 18 and under or under 18. And so broadly speaking, this is one scenario where we need to work in partnership with our pediatric colleagues to ensure that the appropriate level of treatment is followed through on. I'll leave Dr. Skiles to indicate whether or not in subsequent guidelines that would be addressed.
So good afternoon. Definitely, as we mentioned earlier, these are interim guidelines that we had to put in place given the age of the current guidelines. So we quickly addressed the areas that are most common, but certainly in the comprehensive guideline to be developed in the ensuing months, all these other areas and other specialist settings, for example, the pediatric population, would be included in those.
Okay. When should an antihypertensive be withheld?
The question is incomplete. We would certainly need to have an idea of some further scenarios as to answer that question clearly.
Okay. All right.
So I think these are really wonderful questions. I know we have some questions as well to ask the audience themselves. We have a couple of polls that just to keep their participation there.
Yes, so that will be all for the Q&A, and I'm sure our panelists will continue to address some of the questions by typing answers. So we're gonna go into our final poll for today before we wrap up, and I'm handing over to the tech team.
Thanks so much. So the first poll up on your screen, you may have seen this in your pre-test. The diagnosis of hypertension is. We give 10 seconds. 9, 5, 1. Results are seen on the screen. Are we happy with what we're seeing here, Prof. and presenters?
Yes, the correct answer is what the majority has selected. The first one is a little tricky because it does say for each population, but when we put well-defined, we wanted to suggest that there was some beautiful cutoff point that everybody knew about, and that's not true. So it's really what's generally accepted by the expert panels at this time.
Wonderful. So let's go to the next poll that we have here. A mistake in measuring blood pressure is. I don't think this one tricked them. Everybody is saying the same thing here. Except for one person. All right, 3 persons. 5, 4, 3, 2. And here are the results.
That is correct.
That is correct.
Awesome sauce. All right, so we have 11 persons to send to detention. All right, and the final poll. This one might be a little tricky. Which of the following is true about home blood pressure monitoring? Five, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Correct. 91% can be all wrong. They're right.
All right, excellent. All right, so those were the poll questions. Thanks for your participation, everyone. I'll hand back over to our moderator, and then I'll have some final words about the post-test.
Okay, everyone, it has been a great afternoon. And, you know, you can't thank COVID really, because it's turned a lot of us upside down, and a lot of our practices, a lot of our public health system is, you know, strained because of it. But, you know, adversity breeds opportunity. And we have had up to, well, over 570 persons participating. So we want to thank you for attending. I also want to say that it wasn't really presented today, but in the interim guidelines, there's a section on hypertension and telehealth, given the era of COVID that we're practicing in. I'd like to say a special thank you to the ministry's executive management team, our Honorable Minister of Health, Dr. Christopher Tuckton, our Permanent Secretary, Mr. Dunson Bryan, and our CMO, Dr. Jacqueline Bisesa McKenzie. Chronic disease is really a priority for us. And we'd like to give special mention to Dr. Simone Spence, the Director of Health Promotion and Protection. That was her beautiful office you saw in the video, and she has been very supportive otherwise. Special thanks to Dr. Skyers, Director of the NCD unit at the ministry, my boss, who has really been a stalwart, a leader in this event. And thanks for giving greetings and giving opening remarks to us this afternoon. Dr. Donald Gordon, President of the Association of General Practitioners, that gave greetings on behalf of his association. Our three presenters, it takes a special skill to pack so much information into such a short space of time. Your CME hours are well worth it, and you're not paying a cent for it. It was really very well done. Thank you very much, our three presenters, Dr. Pauline Williams-Green, Dr. Aldith Buckland, and Professor Marvin Reed. Thanks to our tech team. So teamwork makes the dream work, right? There are so many persons that had a hand in making this possible. I also want to mention our medical officers of health, our regional technical directors, and other members of the public team that helped to mobilize persons in the public sector, not just the doctors, but all clinicians out there, as well as our associations that help to mobilize our private sector partners. We are one in this, public and private. And lastly, to remind everyone that this is one in a series of 2 sessions on our interim guidelines. Today was hypertension. Next week, Sunday at the same time, will be our guidelines, interim guidelines for diabetes. There would have been some questions in the Q&A that I deliberately avoided because some of them really could be answered next week. So we're looking forward to seeing you register and attend next week, Sunday. Am I leaving anything out? I hope I haven't.
But that they have to do and the evaluation that they have to do once.
Okay, so thanks to the panelists, and I'm handing over to the tech team regarding to give you instructions for the post-test and evaluation.
And thank you, Dr. Roporter, for your stewardship over this afternoon's presentations. Really well done and professional. Thank you so much for being the moderator. And of course, as you said, thank you to all the presenters, everyone in attendance. Thank you for taking your afternoon and spending it with us to learn a bit of something new and to refresh your mind on some things that you knew already. So far you've done a pre-test. That pre-test would have been a link that was in the chat before, and you would have clicked on it. It would have asked you a number of questions, including your name and your email address to verify that it was you. So that you can qualify for the CMEs. Some 470 persons completed the pre-test. Now we're going to have the post-test. We won't do it live. We've actually set it up on the system where once you close your screen and leave the meeting, it will automatically launch a page which allows you to do the post-test. All right. Also, based on your email addresses that you signed up with, it will send you a reminder email to do your post-test in case you have an emergency just now and you can't do it right now. It will send you an email tomorrow to do the post-test. As well, if you check in the chat, I am sharing the link right now of how to do the post-test with the link information for the post-test. All right. So again, once you close this screen, it's going to allow you to go straight into the post-test. Tomorrow, approximately 1 day from now, you'll get an email with the email address that you signed up with Zoom, your registration with the post-test, and it's also right there in the chat for you to click on. I don't want it to move, so I'm disabling the chat so persons can't, do a lot of talking and take it from the screen. So I've paused the chat just so that you can see it there. If you click on that, it will take you directly into the post test. And I believe Prof can confirm that to qualify for the CMEs, it is attendees must complete both the pre-test and the post test. Then there'll be an evaluation of the persons that did it, not necessarily scores, but that the same email address that goes to one person is kind of like a TRN in these digital times. That same email address will qualify you for your pre-test and post-test. You've done both, and once it's approved, you get your CMEs emailed to you. All right, and as Dr. Roporter said, please remember this is the first in a series of 2 very wonderful presentations today on hypertension, and we look forward to next week's presentation on diabetes. Please stay safe. Thank you very much. Excellent job, team. Stay safe. All right, we're going to close out